journalists are still banned from going into Gaza, an almost unprecedented ban on international journalists being able to do their jobs in a war zone. There can only be one conclusion, and that is that the Israeli government are doing things there they don't want the world to see.
Let's start with what happened at Glastonbury. We're both journalists, so let's get on the news. Over the weekend, with death to the IDF, the BBC streaming it live on iPlayer. What did you make of it?
Well, there's a series of disgraceful aspects to this, all of which you laid out, I thought, very well there. First of all, I find it completely laughable that the organisers of Glastonbury have put out a statement saying, obviously, we would never want any of the acts that we book to be anti-Semitic. Well, they literally booked Kneecap after all the furore about what they'd said on stage, not just about killing your local MP, but publicly endorsing Hamas and Hezbollah, who are wedded to the eradication of Israel and to killing Jews. It's about as anti-Semitic as you could get. So they book a band which endorses terror groups wedded to the elimination of the Jewish people. I'd say that's pretty anti-Semitic. So there's a hypocrisy there, I think, from Glastonbury. They knew what they were booking, both with Kneecap and with this other rapper. Then you have the rapper himself. If he'd stuck to Free Palestine, I think we would have all expected a number of acts at Glastonbury to say that and for the crowd to cheer along. That's what they've done for many years. Okay, that's one thing. It's quite another thing to then publicly call for the deaths of other human beings, in this case, members of the IDF, and to then hear thousands of members of that crowd in England joining in a chant in which they're calling for the deaths of other human beings, I thought was absolutely despicable. And, you hit the nail on the head. These are people who profess to be woke, profess to be kind and caring. They're better than the rest of us, these people. And yet there they were as a mob chanting for the deaths of other human beings. I thought it was utterly disgusting. And then there's, of course, the double standard over how we treat grandmothers who got caught up in the Southport murders and all the ridiculous conspiracy theories that flew around after that. And of course, some of them went way too far and they posted stupid things on Facebook, inflammatory things, inciting violence and so on. But in one case, a grandmother deleted what she'd posted within a few hours, recognizing it was something she'd done in an emotional haze. And for that, she was jailed for, I think, 2 years. And yet
31 months.
Right, and here we have Kneecap, who have not been jailed for openly calling for the murder of MPs in a country where 2 MPs have been murdered in the last decade. And then you have this call for the murder of members of the IDF. There is a complete double standard here, which I completely understand why people who support the woman who was jailed will say, look, no one's defending what she did. But how can it be right in modern Britain that a grandmother posting something on Facebook is jailed for 21 months, and you have these guys calling for murder with impunity and nothing happens to them?
Would you have this rapper who started it all on your show?
Yeah, I would actually. And what I would do is I would absolutely grill him and turn him over. There's an interesting debate raging about the fact that I've been accused of platforming people who are anti-Semitic, for example, because they criticize the Israeli government. I don't think it's anti-Semitic to criticize the Israeli government, particularly given what is happening right now in Gaza. And in particular, and I think you would recognize this, Andrew, that journalists are still banned from going into Gaza, an almost unprecedented ban on international journalists being able to do their jobs in a war zone. There can only be one conclusion, and that is that the Israeli government are doing things there they don't want the world to see. So I feel quite angry about that, having supported Israel's right to defend itself after October the 7th. In fact, said it was their duty to their people to defend them from further attacks of that nature. But there are limits here. And I think what the Israeli government is doing now in Gaza with a 3-month blockade, which only recently ended, which is a deliberate starvation of a people, and with the constant bombardment, knowing it's killing so many civilians, and all these reports of people queuing up desperate for food and being shot dead as they queue for food. None of this should be acceptable to anybody. So I think there are lots of ways to criticize this government without being anti-Semitic. So I think there's a lot of weird use of language here to try and silence, I think, legitimate debate.
Criticizing the Israeli government's not anti-Semitic. Many Jewish voters do it in Israel. Many Israeli voters do it. But you have been criticized for giving a platform to anti-Semites. You had Dr. Fouad Izzadi, an extremist Iranian academic, on your show only last week. Now, he expressed not just his support, but his pride in the Hamas atrocities on October the 7th, which I think we can all agree doesn't get more anti-Semitic than that.
Yeah, despicable. And I challenged him immediately that he said that. I wasn't expecting
But should
him.
he even be on your platform?
Well, I think if you take that view, then I think that my argument would be you would end up with nobody who is coming on to give the Iranian side of a massive news story. And I think, you've got to have people on sometimes who are very unpalatable, but who represent the views of the other side in a war. In particular, when you've got Israel attacking Iran, people are hungry for information, hungry for knowledge about the Iranian regime. Do we not platform anybody who will speak in favor of that regime, which is wedded to, the eradication, annihilation of Israel? We've heard that from the Ayatollah. You could say the same argument about Hamas leaders, the same argument about Hezbollah leaders. I just think that at some stage, journalists have to do their job, which is, I believe, get everybody on who has a big mouthpiece, a big following, where people are listening to them, and you let them have their say and you rigorously challenge them. The moment you start making exceptions, I think you're heading down a very perilous road where, well, who do you make exceptions for?
Well, you had Dan Biltzer Sarinian on. You interviewed him in November last year. He was brimful of anti-Semitism and even Holocaust denial. And that was promoted with clips on X.
Yeah.
I mean, should you really use Holocaust denial to market the show?
Well, it's not that. It's taking a guy who's got millions of followers who is spewing this hateful rhetoric on social media platforms that have absolutely no issue in having people like that having large platforms to spew their bile. I tried to get an interview with Kanye West recently for the same reason. He spews a lot of anti-Semitic nonsense and some dangerous rhetoric and violent rhetoric, but he has 33 million followers on X that he's spewing this to on a regular basis. Do we just let him do that without anybody holding him to account? So I think that people like you and I actually have to hold these people to account if they're continuing to be given large platforms on social media.
But we're not going to change their minds, and we may just be giving them a platform to spread their poison.
You might, but you might also be being able to put out, in my case, I've just passed 4 million subscribers. We get millions of views for all of our content. I can counter the constant stream of hateful bile that they're spewing out by putting out to a very large platform myself, somebody actually rigorously challenging them. I think that is an important public duty, actually, when you have the social media companies just allowing all this to happen with impunity.
But it looks as if, I mean, you're not in the least anti-Semitic, but it looks as if you are selling anti-Semitism by giving these people a platform to build an audience.
Well, I had all this at the start of the war from the other side. I had all the Palestinian extremists saying the complete opposite, because I had the audacity to say that a country had a right and duty to defend its people from a massive terror attack and from a bunch of terrorists who wanted to carry on attacking them. I remember the Hamas spokesman being given plenty of airtime. I tried to get him on myself. By the same argument, you would say, well, why would you platform somebody from Hamas? Because they're wedded to the extinction of Israel.
Indeed.
So, I just think once you start going down that road, it becomes very perilous. Would you not have the Ayatollah of Iran on your show now, Andrew, if you're honest? Or would you have him on and give him a good grilling? I would hope it would be the latter.
I'd give him a good grilling, but I might not do it live, given he may say things about the Holocaust.
I think live would be better.
Are you pre-recorded or live?
Yeah, we're pre-recorded, but we go as live as
you
pretty
don't
much.
Edit out the hate speech or the lies.
No,
the
no,
anti-Semitism.
I prefer to challenge them, and like I say, I had months and months and months of the other side, where the Israeli extremists, as I put it, because I get the most unbelievable threats and bile all the time on X
Sure.
From from them now. And these are not moderate people. These aren't moderate Israelis or reasonable Jewish people. These are people who are hateful and violent in their rhetoric and conduct, who do not like anybody deviating from their worldview that absolutely everything the Israeli government is doing since October the 7th is completely justified. I don't happen to agree with that view, just as I didn't agree with all the Palestinian extremists who threatened me regularly in the first few months of this war by saying the complete opposite. So I've gone from being somebody who apparently, is a Zionist, bootlicker to an anti-Jew, anti-Semite. Well, I can't be both.
So if this was the late 1930s, you'd have Goebbels, Goering, Himmler, maybe even Hitler on every second week?
Well, I would certainly, if we were engaged in a war of this nature, I would want to have everybody on to challenge them about what they're doing.
I said the late 1930s, before the war. You'd have them on?
Well, yeah, I think so. They were doing plenty of interviews at the time. And why wouldn't you have them on? Would you not have them on?
Well, I'd want to think twice about it, given what they might say, and I would like to have some control over any hate speech or lies that
you're talking with the benefit of hindsight of knowing what they went on to do. And I think that again, is a perilous...
I think after Kristallnacht, we had a pretty good idea of course,
I don't make any pretense. I just think the moment you start making exceptions, you've got to be very careful what exceptions you make and why you're making them. And like I say, if the spokesman for Hamas was available for an interview to you or me right now, we would both do that interview, I think.
Well, I would say that people who deny the Holocaust, people who urge the death of Jews, people who deny democracy and only speak in violent terms of wiping out a race, they don't deserve to be part of the democratic debate.
Would you have Smodrich and Ben-Gvir on your show, the Israeli government ministers who've been talking openly now about ethnic cleansing and getting all the Palestinians out of Gaza and destroying Gaza and everybody in it?
Much as I dislike what they're saying, they are a product of the Israeli election system. So at least once, probably, but after that, probably not.
Yeah, but they're wedded to ethnic cleansing, and they're talking about it very brazenly and openly now. They want this Gaza destroyed and all the Palestinians kicked out. Well, that's war crimes.
Is it the business model that pushes you in this direction, Piers? I mean, you've taken your show off television onto YouTube, where I see it's a great success, but you need to drive traffic to earn the ad revenues. So is there not a danger you invite the biggest blowhards with the most extreme views for what we used to call a good old Barney?
Well, I have plenty of lively debates with all sorts of people, but I think most of the traffic has been driven in the first 3 years by massive interviews with Donald Trump, with Cristiano Ronaldo, with people of that nature. I flew to Kyiv and interviewed President Zelensky. According to Vladimir Putin, Zelensky is a Nazi, which is obviously absurd. But this is where I say you get difficulty if you start just going down the road of being very selective about who you can interview. And I think you get yourself into a bit of a mess. And
I can see that, and there's difficult lines. I understand that, but is there not a danger of tilting from news and analysis into entertainment? I mean, you said back in April yourself, I'm totally aware of the power of chucking gasoline onto stories. I'm perfectly happy to be at the centre of a gasoline-fueled story. But you know that pouring gasoline on something is not always the way to education, information, or edification.
No, but I would also say I learned from the best, Andrew, and you would be one of those who chucking gasoline onto a big story. You were one of the great scoop breakers in Fleet Street history. And no, I don't want this to be about entertainment when it comes to debating a war. But what Piers Morgan Uncensored has become globally is now one of the most watched shows of its kind in the world, and one of the very few that repeatedly puts people together from both sides of all of these stories, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, whether it's Israel, Hamas in Gaza, whether it's Donald Trump, Brexit, whatever the issue may be, whether it's P. Diddy and whether he's guilty or not. I like to bring people together who emphatically disagree with each other, and I like to challenge them all. I don't like
they go away just shouting at each other. They don't end up shaking hands. They don't end up shaking hands and singing Kumbaya.
Sometimes they do. It depends who they are. Most of the debates we do are actually pretty reasonable. Some of them blow up, and when they do, I don't like them all shouting over each other. That doesn't work for an audience, so I try and stop that when it
Sure,
happens. But I've got no problem with passionate or even angry debate. These are wars we're talking about. A lot of people are dying in these wars. It would be the
sure.
number of people who have a vested interest do not feel passionate about it. And I see myself as somebody, as a steward of legitimate debate. And if people want to frame that as entertainment, they're not really watching what I'm doing. I don't do this for entertainment, but do I want it to be popular? Absolutely. Do I
Well,
feel do I
let
feel
me
proud?
finish on this
Well,
subject.
do I feel proud that we're one of the biggest shows in the world right now, and we
No,
have
I
everybody on
understand that.
it? Yes, I do.
Well, one commentator said you were the Jerry Springer of politics. Is that a plaudit, do you think, or a criticism?
Well, I love Jerry Springer. He was a great friend of mine. In fact, he was the host of America's Got Talent for 2 seasons when I was a judge. Actually, a brilliant man. He was mayor of Cincinnati. He was a serious news anchor for many years. And then he ended up hosting a show that he said, by his own admission, was the worst show in the world, but it made him hundreds of millions of dollars. I have one of the best shows in the world. So on that point, I would say that we have a point of difference. And I'm very proud of our show. However, I did personally love Jerry Springer. So people who
Okay.
use that as a stick to beat me need to find a different stick.